All right, so once again, thanks everyone for joining us. This call will be exclusively covering the call routing aspects of the boberdoo system. So, what we refer to as inbound phone routing. Essentially, this gives you a chance to gather in phone calls just like you would internet leads, and then turn around and sell them and match and route those calls to your buyers as well. So, first and foremost, let's kind of just take a general overview of how it exactly works. So all you need to do to get set up with this in the system, it's already a part of your system. It's just a pay-per-use option. So all you do first is you would order a phone number. This can be a toll-free number. We can order local numbers for you if you require. There's 800 numbers as well. So what happens then is when you order that phone number, it's live in your system in about a minute only, and you can then add them to these campaigns that you create. And that way, when someone dials into that 800 number, so in this example, here's the 800 number. If someone were to dial into that number, that call would then route through the system. The system would check all of your different partners or buyers or agents, and it would look at the lead filter sets, just like it does with the internet leads. And it's going to attempt to then match to the appropriate buyer or partner or agent, and then the system will connect those two calls together. So essentially the lead calls into the number, and then they are routed through and connected, and then they are on the phone with the buyer within a matter of seconds. The calls are recorded in the system. You can listen to the call recordings. You can download them as well. But that's kind of the basic overview. It works essentially the same as internet lead. Instead of someone filling out a form, they call in the number, the information gets passed through, and then routes to the correct buyer to purchase that lead. So to get started, as I mentioned, the first step you're going to want to do is you're going to order. So in your phone routing tab here on the left, once you click that, there's a sub-tab for order phone numbers. So you're going to have two different options here. You can either choose the number of phones you want to order and then submit, and what that will do is we'll generate just a random toll-free number for you. Alternatively, on this next tab, and this allows you to choose the number that you want. The cost it's $5 per month per number that you order. So going back to the first step here, ordering the phone number, just have a random one assigned. You choose the number of phones you want to have. And now we have options for a welcome message. So the welcome message is what is played when someone dials into that 800 number or that local number. By default, the default message is this call may be recorded for quality verification. You can provide us with your own custom MP3 files. If you wanted a different message to be played, that's an option as well. That could be something that's done through a ticket. You tell us, here's the file. We want this uploaded as an option, and that would get added to the drop down here. We also have a silence option. So if you didn't want to express that the calls are being recorded, you didn't want nothing to play. So maybe your buyer that you're selling the calls to already has a message. You don't want it to be redundantly playing. This call may be recorded, connects to another buyer. This call may be recorded. You can set this option to silence. Lastly, we offer custom options for what are referred to as IVRs. So, for example, this one we have in here right now is enter zip. So that means we can listen to a preview of the message as well. What that means is when someone dials into the number, they would hear a prompt that says, please enter your 5-digit zip code, which would then require them to punch that into their phone. And that way, when the call comes through, it not only has the call information, the number they called from, the number they called into, it's also going to have this additional information that they punched in this case, a zip code. And in that way, we could use that data to then filter and only distribute those calls to appropriate buyers who accept that zip code. Zip is just one of the many different options that we could have. It's essentially up to you what you want to have in there. If you want to have an IVR, it could be something where, are you in debt? If you have more than $10,000 $10,000 in debt, press 1. If not, press 2. Or, if this is a home improvement lead type or an auto insurance or health insurance, you could have your questions customized, to play whatever you want in this message. That way, based on what the lead then punches into the phone, the lead can then be routed through. So that's the welcome message. You simply select that. It can always be changed at a later time. This is just what's going to pre-fill in when you order the new number. The next option here is the default phone number. Now this is very important because this is the last line of defense. This is the last thing the system will ring to when someone dials into that 800 number. So to give an example, a lead comes through, a call comes through, I should say, and attempts to buyer A. It rings to them. They don't answer. The call will then roll back and attempt to go to the next buyer in line. If they don't answer, it's going to roll back and go to the third buyer in line. After the third attempt, it's going to then go to this default number that you enter in here. So this should be some type of voicemail service, a call center, your own office phone. It should never have anything to do with the buyer you're trying to sell the lead to. It should be kind of something that's on your end. Because when a lead comes through and it doesn't match and sell, it goes to this default number, and those leads show up as unmatched on your inbound phone routing leads page. Another example is, let's say someone calls into your 800 number in the middle of the night. You don't have any buyers taking calls at that time. That person would then go to this default number. Finally, the last two options from the drop-downs here is you can choose to automatically assign this new phone number into a campaign automatically, or assign a new SRC to this campaign automatically. This option is up to you. It can always be changed at a later time. Most people will assign it to pool, no source, and that way they can go into the campaign and adjust those manually to change what campaign the number needs to be in or change what the source is. Lastly, we have options for caller ID check, it's 2 cents per query. It's going to attempt to look up the caller ID just so you can gather some more information on the phone call. Finally, the duplicate check, if you want to enable or disable it. Duplicates work a little bit differently in phone calls. With internet leads, if a duplicate comes in and it's found to be a duplicate, we reject that lead from coming in. That's not what happens in phone calls. If it's enabled, this means if I'm a lead, I call into the 800 number and it routes to buyer A, and the call sells appropriately, it charges them. I then call back into that same number with that same origin phone. The system will automatically see that as a duplicate, and it will automatically route that call to the same buyer that it received it before. It would not create a new lead ID in the system. It would add that total call duration and a new call to the previous lead ID. Compared to if it was unchecked, meaning duplicate check is turned off, that new second call that comes in would be a separate lead ID itself, and it would route and sell to whoever is available at that time. So once you select this information, you just click Submit Order. And as I mentioned, the numbers are live in about a minute only. You can click on the ongoing request browser to see any here. And then once they're live, they're crossed out like you see now. And then any numbers you order that aren't assigned to a campaign will show up under your Manage Phones tab here. Now we don't have any phone that aren't assigned to a campaign. So now that we have the number, it's ready for you to use. You have to just assign it to a campaign. So let's say, for example, just for these purposes, I'm going to remove this particular number. So let's say we ordered a brand new phone number. And now we see it here under our Manage Phones tab. So this is the number we ordered, not assigned currently to a campaign. To add a new campaign or to assign it to a campaign that you've already created, you can click on the Manage Campaigns tab. At the top, we'll give you the option to create one. It's very simple. You just fill in 3 names and any notes you want. Campaign name is visible to everyone. Internal names only visible on your end. And then the vertical is how you can then filter on the leads page. So you want to kind of group the calls by the appropriate vertical. So if they're doing health calls versus Medicare, you could label those verticals appropriately, and that way filter by that, a lead type essentially for the phone calls. Once you fill that out, you just click Add New, and it adds it in there. So this number in parentheses is the number of phones that are currently assigned to that campaign. So right now this one has 0. If I want to add that number to it, I click on this icon to show phones. I see any unassigned phones here in the drop down. So I could, if I had multiple, I could choose. So I select this one and I click the little icon next to it. It gets added here. So as you can see, at any point I can always come back and change the welcome message, change the default phone, make it have caller ID, yes or no, make it be a duplicate checker, yes or no, change the SRC, yes or no, and then here this button will then save it. That is the process of ordering a new phone number and setting up in a campaign. If we were to dial into this number right now, like I said, it would show up on the leads page. It would attempt to match and sell and process and go out to your partner or your buyer or agent. So now that we're getting the calls into the system, setting up your, like I said, your partners, buyers, agents with filter sets is the next step to ensure that they're accepting calls, they're paying the appropriate amount for these calls. So once you're on that partners tab, just like any account that's buying internet leads, you have to create the filter set. You can click the icon here. So with the other filter sets, you're always selecting, oh, they're taking mortgage leads, they're taking health insurance, they're taking auto insurance. If they're taking phone calls, you have to select inbound phone as the lead type. So now I click the plus sign to add the new filter, and I'm going to get the pop-up identical to the regular lead filter sets. The only difference is there's a couple more options at the top here that apply specifically to phone calls. But once again, at the top, you set the name. That's for your reference only. You set the lead price. This is what those calls sell for. And now here's where the differences come in. You're going to have to put in the partner ring to number. This is the number that the partner or the agent or the buyer needs to answer the phone at. So if I set this up, and let's say I was a lead and I call it to the 800 number, it routes through the system and matches to this account's filter set. The system will then dial out to this number. So that's the number that, like I said, they have to answer the phone at. Maximum concurrent calls. This is the maximum number of calls that this ring to number can get at the same time. This is very important to discuss with your buyer how many calls they can get at the same time, because you're going to want to put an accurate number in here. If they can only get 2 calls at the same time, you're going to want to put 2. What that means then is if a call comes in and the system sees that this filter set already has 2 calls currently routed to that number, the system will automatically skip it over and look for the next person in line. And why that's important is because all the time that the lead is on the phone waiting is precious seconds. Obviously, the quicker that the phone call gets answered is going to increase the chances that the lead is going to stay on the line. So if you had it set to 10, just putting any number in there, and they could really only set 2. If another call comes through and they're still on the line, they're not able to answer it, the system's going to continue to ring to this number, and no one's going to answer. So it's going to just add time that the lead's waiting instead of having it skip over and go to the next person in line. So maximum concurrent calls, the maximum number of calls they can get at the same time. This option below, inbound phone routing per minute fee, this is if you want to extend a per minute fee to this particular partner. Some people elect to have higher lead price and no per minute fee. Some people like to lower the lead price and then charge a per minute fee. It's kind of up to you how you want to do your pricing for that. The next section is minimum number of minutes for a successful call. So if you agree with your call buyer and say you're only going to charge them for calls that last at least 30 seconds. This is in decimal format, so 1 would be 1 minute or 60 seconds. So 30 seconds would be 0.5. 15 seconds would be 0.25, so on and so forth. So what happens is if a call comes through and it matches to this account and it only lasts 10 seconds, that call would then show up on the leads page as declined, meaning that it matched successfully, it just didn't reach that minimum call time. So it doesn't show as matched to that account, it doesn't show as sold, since it didn't reach that minimum number of minutes. If they don't want to have a minimum, you can just set it to 0. Next option here is if you want to record phone calls, yes or no. The recording of the phone calls is included in your permanent fee, so it's up to you whether you want to then have them recorded or not. Now, this next option is use default routing for failed calls. And if you remember what we talked about earlier is the default number. So if it rang into partner 1 and they don't answer, then it's going to roll back and go to the next person line. And if they don't answer, it's going to roll back and go. That's what the default routing means. It's going to attempt to someone else if they don't answer. So by default, that's set to yes. However, we have this option, if no, charge for the call no matter what. And you'll see that the ring timeout here, which is the number of seconds that it attempts to ring to this number before it rolls back and tries someone else. If I set this to no, it automatically changes it to no timeout. So what this setting is usually used for is your quote-unquote trouble buyers, meaning you have a campaign running, you're launching calls, and you're having them go to this one particular account, and it's ringing to them, and they're not answering the phone, and then the call just ends up going to the default phone. No one else can take the call. So essentially, you're just losing money on those calls. If you set this to no, this means that once it rings and connects to this buyer, it's going to keep ringing to them and keep ringing to them until either they pick up, their voicemail picks up, the lead hangs up, whatever one of those comes first. Essentially, once it connects to this buyer, they're purchasing that call. It's their responsibility to then answer it. So that's always kind of like a nice backup setting in case you do have some issues with your buyers not answering the calls. You can set this so that they're charged for the call no matter what. So now the sets look exactly like your other ones. You're going to set the accepted lead sources, so where they can accept calls from. If they want to get an email notification once the call's done, most people don't like to get the email notification of the call since it really doesn't have that much information in it, being the raw call. So many people elect to choose the option no delivery, and that means no delivery is then sent out when the call is done. The next steps here are like your normal filters as we've explained, but very important for all of them, you're going to want to set the time of the day and day of the week they accept calls, since they physically have to be there to answer the phone call. So it's very important to have that set accurately, as well as the match priority. If a call comes through and you have multiple buyers that accept that call from that campaign, who does it go to first? Who should it go to first? It's based upon this match priority option. Higher the priority, they're going to get that call first every single time. The same priority, it's going to go round robin based on who hasn't gotten a call attempted to them in the longest amount of time. I saw a question come across about exclusivity. These are phone calls, so they are only selling once, so you do not have to ever set exclusivity since the calls can only sell to one buyer. Time of the day of the week, as I mentioned, daily limits, weekly limits, monthly limits, those can all be set as well. So now down to the bottom here, you can have your actual filter sets. By default, the only ones you're going to have are the origin phone area code, the terminating phone, the state, and the campaign. This one has zip because we had that custom IVR that I discussed right at the beginning. So it allows them to then filter by that field as well. If we had different, if you had different an IVR set that has a press 1 or press 2 option with different choices, that could then be constructed as a filter set as well. So you can make sure that only appropriate buyers accept calls that press certain options from the IVR. Another question came through for, can we set different prices based on the day? That's yes as well. So right now, always going to have that lead price that you set at the top here. The times and days you accept leads, we have the option to click a plus sign here to set different times, different days, as well as different prices. So for example, if they take leads Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. We want to charge them $55. But for weekend leads, all through the weekend, 4 hours, we only want to charge $30. It's based upon the time of the day or the day of the week. If you don't have anything set here, it can be default to 0. That means it's always going to pull the lead price that at the top here. So once you can set any of the information you want, most common filter obviously is the campaign. Hey, they only take, tax calls because it's a tax account. You have another account that's for health insurance. You would only select the health insurance campaign. So these campaign names are based upon that first screen we looked at when you're adding a new campaign. So once you're done constructing the filter set, you can click Save, and that will save any of your changes. It will save that filter set settings, so that way this can now filter. So I can always come in here and edit it if you need to change the price, change the delivery method, change the ring timeout. All that can be changed at any time. So that's set up a part to calls. They have to have the filter set, and then just like any other account, they have to be active. So now the leads page, every call that comes through, see who it attempted to, who was on the list for it to attempt to, who it matched to, how long the call was, how much it sold for as well. So once you get to the leads page, you can then click on inbound phone. I'm going to set the date range here. Internet lead types. It's going to have the lead ID, the date, the SRC, the state, which is a lookup based upon the lead or origin phone's area code, the session ID, which is a unique ID of the phone call for our phone carrier. As I mentioned, the origin phone is the lead's phone number. The terminating phone is the 800 number or campaign that they dialed into. You can see the campaign name here, internal name. And as I mentioned, the vertical allows you to then filter. So if you say, hey, I only want to see the lawsuit calls, you could then click on that. It will only display those. So if you on the left here, different tabs for the different verticals, all the phone calls are grouped into one lead type, and this allows you to then sort by or only display certain ones. So looking at this, if I want to exit out, I can just click Reset to the filter, and that will then reset that to display all of the calls. So just looking at a quick glance here, you can see the total call duration, the longest call duration if there's multiple, and that applies to that duplicate rules that you can set. As I mentioned, if duplicate check is enabled, if the same origin phone calls into the same campaign, they're going to be routed to the same buyer they were previously matched to. That would show up then as a 2 here with the total call duration, as well as breaking down what the longest call of those two were. So on the right-hand side, we see who it matched to, how much it sold for, and then the one main thing that's different about the phone tab is it has this last icon that's a phone for phone services. Clicking on this allows you to listen to the call recording as well as download it to your desktop. Same can be done on the phone services icon to download and listen to the calls. So different statuses that are possible on the inbound phone page. It's either going to show matched and who it sold to. Unmatched is meaning that the call made it in, it went to the default number, So call to the default phone, and that's why it shows as unmatched. So no one answered, or this lead came in, at almost 11 o'clock at night Central Time. Probably don't have any buyers active taking calls, so it goes to that default number. The ones that are declined, for all these leads, you can always click the Show Lead Log, which I'll go into details here. But for the declined ones, so for all lead logs, of course, you're going to have to read from the bottom up. Just like your leads page, the most recent ones are always at the top. So this call came in. It found two different matching buyers. This is their ring to number for this ID, account ID. This is the ring to number for that ID. The call went to the first one with that phone number, and this one actually failed. Let me find one that has the minimum call time. Just 1 second. So these are all test calls we were doing, so that's why they are showing up as that. So here's an example. The call came through, it matched this account, it went to them. You can see the difference in the timestamps to see how long it actually rang to them. And then you can see the call lasted 0.33 minutes. It's less than the minimum of 0.5, so we undo the sale. So that's why it shows up then as declined. Going listen or to listen to what was said so far, or save it to your desktop. So when we look at a matched one, same things can be seen. Bottom up, it shows these two accounts as matches. It went to the first one, and it rang to them, and the call lasted that long, and they were successfully charged. It then delivered the email. So ones where it ends up going to the second buyer, you would see that in the lead log. It would see match partner, these two, call went to first partner with this number. It would say that it didn't route to that number, call went to the second partner with this number, and then they were charged. So the lead log always gives you that insight to see, who's matching on the calls. So this account was considered. If they wouldn't have answered, it would have then attempted to them. And again, that's based on then the priority settings that you have. The higher priority is always going to go. The higher priority is always going to be getting the calls attempted to them first. So that's the main gist of the leads page. It's not as interactive as your other leads page where you can reprocess leads or decline them and so on and so forth. These are the raw calls that come through. The main thing you do from this page is download and listen to the recordings, as well as see who's being considered, who's being matched to those phone calls. Finally, reporting aspect of inbound phone. There's quite a few different reports that are available specifically for inbound phone. You can see your billable minutes is one as well. We also have what's referred to as the drill down report, which I find to be the most helpful. I'm trying to set a big date range here. 1 second. So with this drill down, you have of which companies are getting matched leads and what order they're getting matched, how many success attempts, how many total failed attempts, rollbacks, the average revenue they're making per attempt, their conversion percentage, average call time, total duration that they spent, and then for each of these successful calls, you can click on it to show the call details. So this is important because it's going to show you then the, maybe maybe one particular client is getting a lot of calls attempted to them, but their average revenue for attempt and their conversion percentage is pretty low. Um, in those cases, you may want to then change the priority so that they're not getting as many calls, since they're getting them attempted to them, but they're just not answering. Um, Obviously with phone calls, you need to have someone answer the call for it to sell. So having a high conversion percentage is more important usually than the price per lead that they're paid. They may have a really high per lead price, but they're not answering the calls, so they're ended up going somewhere else. So that's why this average revenue per temp is always a big um, decider for who should be getting the calls. The drill down report, we also have our standard base reports that we have in the other lead types, but there are more phone specific ones: campaign list, calls by hour, caller ID check count, area code, phone services, the recordings report. Got another question here. Can you explain how live transfers work in the system? So we have a couple different options for that we can set up in the system for live transfers. Many people want to do the routine where an internet lead comes through and they want that internet lead to match to the buyer, and then that same buyer get the phone call as well. Is that what you are referring to, Tyler, or are you referring to just the live transfer process instead of the direct dial into the 800 number? I'm going to assume it's the latter one, so I'll cover that one first and then cover the other one after that. So with live transfers, many people will want to kind of screen the lead maybe before they do the actual transfer. Some people have a call center. They're on the phone with the lead, and they're prepping them or asking them questions or qualifying to want to put that. And then when the call center then says, okay, I have someone to transfer the call to you, they would just simply then transfer the call to that 800 number that you have. Just that way the call routes through. The call center just has to be set up to then pass through that origin phone or lead's phone number. So that way that's what comes through, and not the same call center number comes through. That way the leads show appropriately who the lead's number was. So that's kind of how some people do the live transfers in that aspect. So they get someone that qualifies them on the call. They then transfer them to the 800 number. And then the system does the whole routing to see which buyer it needs to transfer to. The other part that I mentioned about having the internet lead match to the phone call as well, there's a couple settings that we can configure on the back end to set that up per different lead types. And so what happens is the internet lead will have to come through first, and the source that the internet lead comes through, so settings, source vendor settings, you click on your internet lead type. Let's for this example, Medicare. So I would click on the Medicare lead type. Don't think we have one. Let's just use health then, for example. There's a live transfer data lead type as well. So these have to have the manual review check set to yes. So that way what happens is the internet lead, it enters your system and it's flagged and stopped. It doesn't attempt to distribute or sell at that time. So it stops at that point. That way when the call comes through, the inbound phone call, and then it routes and ends up matching to a buyer, once that buyer picks up the phone, the system then does a reverse lookup. It finds the origin phone number of that call, and then finds the then internet lead that has that same origin phone number that's sitting in review. And then the system will automatically process that lead, so that way the buyer who answered the call will then get that internet lead delivered to them as well. So the buyer just has to have two filter sets, one for the internet lead, one for the inbound phone call, and then the source the internet lead comes from just has to be set to manual review. And many people ask, well, why does the internet lead have to come in first? The reason being is we need to wait until we have a matching call buyer before we can route the internet lead. If we did it the reverse way, what would happen is the call comes or the internet lead comes through, it matches to buyer A. The call comes through, it rings to buyer A, but maybe they don't answer. It then rolls back and goes to buyer B. Well, now buyer B got the call, buyer A got the internet lead. Having the internet lead come through and hit review, that way we're waiting for someone to actually answer and get that phone call before we then route that internet lead to them. So that's kind of the whole what we refer to as the inbound phone data lookup, meaning the phone call looks for that data lead with that same number. It then automatically matches that internet lead to the same buyer, partner, agent that received the phone call. Therefore, the agent or buyer or partner then has the person on the phone, as well as having the internet lead with their full information sent to them. So whether it's email, whether they have it posted to their system, any of those can work, but that way they have that information when they're talking on the phone. So looking through here, I'm trying to see what else you could here for the phone calls. While we're under the source vendor settings page, by default type, your inbound phone lead type will always have IPR, IPRT, IPRX. Those should never be edited, should never be deactivated, never changed or deleted. Those are standard SRCs that have to stay in the system. Most people elect to route their phone calls based upon the campaign. So in that situation, every single source would be the same. Since you want to do all your tracking and your routing based upon the different campaigns, that's how some people elect to do it. The only reason we usually see sources created is if you have two different numbers in one particular campaign. So that way you have one campaign with two different numbers. You have two different SRCs then to be able to differentially track those two different numbers inside the same campaign. But when adding a new source, you're really just only going to name it. Everything else can stay the same. You can't change the partners per lead. You can't change, you can obviously change the cost as well if you want to run for profit reports. But the partners per lead has to stay for 3 because it's going to route an attempt to 3 different matches only. Lead QC is not applicable since it's not any first name or last name or address, city, state, email coming through. So the name is very important, and then the vendor account as well. So we do have vendor login, so someone's going to be able to see what calls they've sent through. They want to see the call durations, run different reports. That's possible on their end as well. So that pretty much covers, the main parts. Ordering the phone number so you can get the calls into the system. We set up the partners or the buyers to accept or purchase those calls. The leads page where you can see it all happen, where they're coming from, what the information is, who they sold to, what the call recordings are, and then as well as the reporting aspect to then go back and check and run numbers and calculate different things. 1 second. Unplug this. All right. Thank you very much, Brett. Appreciate the walkthrough. This is Scott again from Boberdoo. We did have a handful of questions, a couple of them by me along the way.
And so I think now's a good time for us to open it up and see if there's any questions from the group, people that are still on that didn't Skype them across. So now's a good time. So please let us know. All right.
Oh, yeah, Scott, I jumped in a little bit late. I think I missed it. This is Fred. When you get a phone call through, it's basically $5 per month per line. Is that right? And then
that's correct.
And then there's all the call recording and all that per minute. Okay. What's the per minute fee?
So that is going to range, depending on your pricing plan, from 10 cents per minute down to 6 cents per minute. So we can always, if you have questions on that pricing, I think it was in your original agreement, and you and I can email on that, work out the details, no problem.
Okay, perfect. So the per minute is just the total of how long they stay on the phone, and
exactly right. So that's for the length of the call, from the lead dialing through your partner hanging up.
Correct.
Okay.
It is 2 legs, the inbound and the outbound, as you mentioned.
So that was exactly what I was going to get to. So it does include both the inbound call from the lead into the lead system, and then the outbound, which is at least at a minimum of 1 leg out, sometimes more, and all of that is included into the same price. There was also a question of whether this video will be available online. We will be emailing anybody that registered the video directly, but anybody that's still on, if you have not registered for this, please instant message through the Join Me your email address, and we'll make sure you get a copy. And then also my email is Scott, SCOTT, at boberdoo.com. And so you can always shoot me an email, and we'll get you a copy of that as well. So do we have any other questions out there? So I'll just conclude by saying that, inbound phone routing isn't typically as complicated, or doesn't have to be as complicated as some of the web lead distribution can be. Many of our clients that are utilizing the call routing find it's a good value add for their clients so that they can present a full lead portfolio. And typically people like calls because as a buyer, your contact rate is virtually 100%. Leads like it because they typically get an immediate contact with somebody that can service their request. And then lead sellers typically like it because versus web leads, calls will generate a premium because of that high contact rate. So we encourage you to give it out. If you have questions on either how to utilize the call routing or opportunities and other ways that you want to advertise a number, again, my email is scott@boberdoo.com. And feel free to shoot me an email. We can set up a call if needed. All right. So thank you very much for joining us on this webinar today. We look forward to watching your calls come through. Thanks a lot and have a good day.